Welcome, everyone. My name is Evan Kirk. I'm at the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina. We are hosting this webinar, more of a meeting workshop, EPA Integrated Planning, Small Communities Workshop. So thank you for joining us. The objectives of the workshop today, we're going to understand as a group action items that can help small communities and municipalities get started with integrated planning. We're going to introduce you in the breakout groups to various resources, including EPA fact sheets on integrated planning, specifically a fact sheet on getting started and a fact sheet on funding. We're going to show you the general resources page, and we're going to just discuss as a group using polling questions and targeted questions to each breakout group, different considerations when getting started, potentially hurdles you may face, and we're going to show you how you might be able to overcome some of those hurdles. There's varying expertises in the room today about integrated planning. We're going to hear from a community that has completed an integrated plan, but we tried to target this marketing to communities that were considering integrated planning. So we hope that a lot of your peers on this workshop today have not completed an integrated plan, and then you're in a room where a lot of folks are considering completing an integrated plan. So let's hear from each other as much as we can in the breakout groups about what your considerations are and where you are as a community. And there are some consultants in the room today too, but we're going to focus speaking with the municipalities themselves. When I say municipality, that can include county, all sorts of different local governments. So just take that as a pretty broad term. And then we're going to participate in small breakout sessions. Here's our agenda. So you've heard from me. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Robin DeYoung, here in a second. And then we're going to hear from Lakewood, Ohio. We've got Lou McMahon and Mayor George to tell the story about Lakewood and their wet weather plan. Then we're going to break into breakout groups for about 40 minutes. And we've got excellent facilitators for you today to help you in those breakout rooms, along with some 7 poll questions that will help us stir the conversation. We're going to come back to the breakout, to the main room, and sorry, that should say 15 minutes debrief, but we're going to debrief for 15 minutes, and then I'm going to show you a tool that the EFC is developing that we're hoping will help folks identify targeted resources towards your specific situation when getting started with integrated planning, and also help the EFC at UNC and the EFC at the University of Maryland, and then the Water Center at University of Pennsylvania, identify folks who may be great communities for direct assistance. So we'll discuss that here a couple times. But with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Robin DeYoung at EPA.
Great, thank you, Evan, for that. So really excited to be here today. I am EPA's Integrated Planning and Green Infrastructure Program Lead in the Office of Water. And first I want to get started with talking about what is EPA's Integrated Municipal Stormwater and Wastewater Planning Framework, also known as EPA's Integrated Planning. It is a voluntary process that we established in 2012, and it's for primarily municipalities to meet Clean Water Act requirements and human health goals. So we're staying away from the siloed approach, and we're moving towards an approach where you're looking holistically at both stormwater and wastewater and community priorities so that you can sequence and look at a long-term solution for your wet weather needs. It also provides guidance to EPA, states, and municipalities so that you can fold in community priorities, identify what's the most significant problem within your community so that you can meet the Clean Water Act, and also assessing your community's financial capabilities so that you can pay for the investments that you need to keep your water infrastructure resilient over time. In 2019, the integrated planning was reinforced by the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act. And so integrated planning is now embedded in the Clean Water Act. If you're interested in using integrated planning for looking at future permit terms and conditions or meeting enforcement consent decrees, you can now feel more comfortable and have more certainty that now that integrated planning is within the Clean Water Act. Next slide. Now, there are many different regulated sources that the integrated plan can primarily address. Combined sewer discharges from combined sewer systems that could turn into combined sewer overflows. In your sanitary sewer, there could be sanitary sewer overflows. Maybe you have a wastewater treatment facility, or you are managing a MS4, multiple separate storm sewer system discharges. Now, a lot of times what you'll see is the integrated plan will address a combination of these. Sometimes an integrated plan can just focus on the MS4 aspect of it and look long-term, and that is called our long-term stormwater planning. Sometimes some municipalities have looked at multiple wastewater treatment facilities to sequence what their upgrades are over time. And typically an integrated plan is about a 15 to 25 year projection of what the community needs to do. In addition to these primary sources of pollution, you could also include other environmental or community priorities as long as any type of reprioritization provides equal or greater water quality benefit. So you could look at water reuse, resiliency and flooding, and you could assess some of your environmental justice needs. Safe drinking water could be a part of your integrated plan. And green infrastructure is definitely recommended to be a part of your integrated plan, or other possible priorities. So it's very holistic in a sense. It's not just about the Clean Water Act, but that is the primary focus. Next slide. So this is the framework. There are 6 elements that you would go through. And today we are going to cover element 1 in the breakout sessions, along with how you can get started to get to that point. Next slide. We have a report to Congress that we completed and submitted to Congress in 2021. It's available online. We have just about 30 integrated plans that have been completed, and more can continue to come in. This report to Congress has 13 profiles of different integrated plans that have been used to meet permit requirements, administrative orders, or consent decrees. So I highly recommend you check out those 2-page profiles. They're easy reads, and or the entire report to Congress if you want to get into the nitty-gritty. Next slide. Here are some examples of integrated plans that have been incorporated in NPDES permits. So you can see here that if you were interested in understanding how an integrated plan could eventually turn into certain terms and conditions, or at least the permit considers that integrated plan, then you can take a look at one of these municipalities, and all of that information is on our website. Next slide. We're really pleased to be able to partner with the Environmental Finance Center. We are offering technical assistance through the Environmental Finance Center, and it is available until September of 2022. So after you listen to this workshop today, we're hoping that you'll send an email to Evan Kirk or Ellen Kohler from the Environmental Finance Center of University of North Carolina or University of Pennsylvania, and put in office hours in the subject line. Tell them that you're interested in talking more about how you can get started with integrated planning, or if you're thinking about funding, if you're thinking about how to reprioritize and sequence some of your investments, they would be a great resource for you. Next slide. And the other thing that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of is that we've been very active on developing tools and resources. So integrated planning can be as easy as possible, because it can feel overwhelming. I get it. So what we've been doing is when the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act came out, we have wrote a memo to our regions so that they know what was in there. It's a great layman's explanation of what was in the law. So you can take a look at that if you want to really understand what was in there. We have many webcasts that have been recorded. The report to Congress is a great resource. Fact sheets are also coming over time, and we'll be talking about how to get started fact sheet, as well as the determining drivers and requirements, and the funding the development of an integrated plan. All of those are either in progress or available already online. And soon we'll have a story map with showcasing successes, as well as a toolkit for state permitting authorities. So those are all things that you can look forward to, and the web link is right at the bottom. So thanks so much for listening. I will be on one of the breakout sessions later, facilitating. And now, and I also wanted to mention my contact information is on this slide, on the thank you slide. And myself and Jamie Pizziali, who is our municipal ombudsman at EPA, we are both available if you have questions. Jamie coordinates with EPA offices, helps communities navigate EPA's resources, and is an advocate for fair processes and uniform application of Clean Water Act policies. So feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about integrated planning. And now I'm going to turn it over to our main speakers today. I'm so delighted to have Lou McMahon and Mayor George speak to us about Lakewood's integrated wet weather improvement plan. Lou McMahon is a partner at the environmental law firm of McMahon de Lewis LLP in Cleveland, Ohio. And his focus on his practice is Cleaner Water Act compliance for local governments and on brownfields redevelopment sites. He represents municipalities, large and small, across Ohio regarding developing the implementation of integrated plans for compliance, efficiency, and affordability. He lives in Lakewood, Ohio, and serves on has served several years as the chair of Lakewood's Planning Commission. And we also have Mayor Megan George, who was sworn in as the mayor of Lakewood on January 1st, 2020. Mayor George is a graduate of Lakewood High School, Ohio State University, the Ohio State University. I learned that when I lived in Columbus, and Cleveland State University. She worked in private and public sectors for many years and obtained her state of Ohio education license and life and health insurance license. She's also the past president of the Lakewood City Academy and is currently a member of several local and regional boards. So I'd like to turn it over to our Lakewood speakers today, Lou and Mayor George. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Lou and I are so excited to be presenting the details of Lakewood's integrated wet weather improvement plan. And our hope is that you'll be able to take away some of the information that we provide and bring it home and implement it in your community. Next slide. So before we get started, we wanted to include a slide that talks a little about who is Lakewood and where we're located. Lakewood's located in where the green star is. We are an inner ring suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. We are immediately west of the city of Cleveland on the shore of Lake Erie, and we are the 15th largest city in the state of Ohio. We were initially established in 1889 as one of Cleveland's streetcar era suburbs and officially became a city in 1911 and continued to grow through the 20th century. Next slide. Here's a slide on Lakewood by the numbers. We are currently just over 50,000 residents, which is lower than our peak in the 1970s, where we were over 70,000 residents. We are the densest city in the entire state of Ohio, being only 5.6 square miles and having over 50,000 people. 45% of our residents are owner-occupied units, while 55% are rentals. 31% of our population is of the millennial generation. Sometimes we've been known as a college town without a college. And as mentioned earlier, we're one of the streetcar era suburbs. And the majority of our housing stock and our sewers were built before World War II. So that provides some challenges for us that we have worked through with the implementation of our integrated wet weather improvement plan. So that kind of sets the stage of who Lakewood is. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lou McMahon to kind of go into some more of the details of our integrated planning.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please, Evan. I'm going to show you what may be shocking to modern sensibilities, but this picture right here is what Lakewood's largest park, called Lakewood Park, on the shore of Lake Erie. This is in the late 1920s, and there are two peaks that that set out into Lake Erie and this beach in between. This is the 1920s. The next slide is going to show you quite a different picture of the same area. That is Lakewood Park in the 1970s, when it was in its third or fourth decade of being the municipal landfill built right out into the lake. It was a very different understanding of how we use our water resources and land resources at the time. But the city fathers, city leaders at the time understood this to be a reasonable use of this resource. Next slide, please. Of course, things are very different today. This is that same area, that's Lakewood Park. And during one of our festivals, those are called the solstice steps that face the summer sunset right there. And there's a big festival. And Mayor talked about the young population in Lakewood. Lakewood has really embraced its water resources here in our second century and our connection to the water that we have. So you can go to the next slide. How is it that a city would turn a lakefront like that into a landfill? The answer goes back to the relationship that the city and the area had at the time with water. Lakewood, when it was sewered, the mayor talked about how in 1911 it became a city and it had explosive growth about 100 years ago. Sewers were not built as a system. There was no wastewater treatment plants that they were connected to. And so they were built to go directly into the lake. So about a third of the city of Lakewood is a single pipe combined sewer that drained directly to the lake without treatment. The rest of the city had what was an innovation for the time, these over-under sewers, the purpose of which was not to separate sanitary from storm necessarily, but to move sanitary waste more quickly, because the fear actually was of disease by fumes and noxious fumes, not from, they didn't really anticipate the germ theory so much. So the idea of the lower sewer, what's labeled a sanitary sewer there, was just to move it more quickly. As you'll see, most of the houses that were built in the teens and 20s actually had a downspout directly connected to that lower sewer to flush it, to keep the fumes from accumulating. And that was the purpose of this. Again, none of this was connected to a wastewater treatment plant. So it was a very different idea of how you interacted with water. Next slide, please. So this is an indication of sort of the historic flow. Again, there's no interceptor. There eventually was a plant built. You'll see in the next slide, but these basically drained to where the water resources were, and solution to pollution was dilution. This is historically there. The next is what happened by the 1945, that interceptor was built and a plant was built. So it's a single, it's been a system that's been put together. And these have over-under sewers mixed with single pipe combined sewers. It is a very complex, antiquated system that on the whole works reasonably well. It works perfectly in dry weather and actually has very large wet weather capacity, but it still has some overflow. So this is what drove Lakewood to have to be looking at doing an integrated plan, because you have an entirely built up community that, there's no available land to do more storage. You're talking about reinventing a city for its second century. So for more than a decade, actually for a number of years before 2012 and EPA's integrated planning framework was established, Lakewood was taking a very integrated approach to addressing these overflows. Next slide, please. This is what I mentioned, that most houses have a downspout connected directly to what's labeled there a sanitary sewer. So we've done a lot of work to figure out how you correct that. We've done pilot studies, very costly, very intrusive. My own house that I'm sitting in right here in Lakewood actually has it on a combined sewer, and there is a downspout that goes right underneath my house through the basement, which I am disconnecting this summer when I do a waterproofing project. Next, please. So in evaluating, Lakewood we had to do a very extensive investigation, given this, given the type of system we have, to identify what were the biggest issues, where were the biggest problems. A lot of monitoring and developed a very detailed model. So you can see by the sort of size of the circles is the overflow annual volume. We also did pollutant modeling. The intensity of the red is where most of the pollutants were. So we did this so that we could make sure, as we did our planning, we get the best bang for the buck in certain projects. We could prioritize where things are going, but also take advantage of opportunities as they arose. I want to point you to the yellowish circle. It's labeled lose 1135, right at the top of the middle. That's at Lakewood Park. That's 82 activations. I'm going to come back to that with a project that's coming up. It would not, based on this prioritization, be the first thing that we did, but we had opportunities and took advantage of them because we had an integrated plan. Next, please. So of course, Lakewood from the beginning started this actually in the late 1990s, but into the 2000s, knew that if we're going to reinvent ourselves for a second century, that we couldn't just do a sewer program in isolation. These are the things that a city that's more than 100 years old has to pay attention to in every city. We have infrastructure renewal, but we also have to do streets. We also have to stay current with the 21st century, public safety technology, how to make sure our water lines are all appropriate. So it's not just infrastructure in a vacuum or in a silo. Next, please. And of course, as the mayor said, affordability is always a concern. Lakewood did not have lots of extra land or to do projects. It certainly doesn't have extra money. Its median income in Lakewood is less than the state median, which is much less than the national median. Our bottom 20% of households already pay more than 2% of median household income on infrastructure. And with the programs that we have, we're doing our best to stay affordable, but we think the second quintile may exceed the 2% threshold by 2028. Yet we've been able to sustain some progress. So we're highly, highly attuned to making sure there's affordability. And if we put a shovel in the ground, we have to hit bullseyes. It's been a watchword, and we have to be able to pay for it. The integrated plan has allowed us to do that. Next, please. As I mentioned, Lakewood never stopped making progress, even as it was developing its plan. It's done about 85 million, actually more than that, in projects, and several of those projects have eliminated some CSOs, eliminated or fully controlled those CSOs and other interconnections that we found in the system. We did a pilot project of what's the cost-effective way of this very strange system with over-under public sewers and private property connected to the sanitary laterals, downspouts connected to that. What is the cost-effective way to go forward in the different projects? We have a new high rate treatment that's coming on. So any wastewater and any combined sewage that gets to the plant site now will be treated before it's discharged to Lake Erie. That increases our average daily flow is like 4.5 million gallons, but that'll get us up to 70 million gallons of wet weather treatment. Next, please. So as doing our integrated planning for our overflow control, we had to marry all those interests that we had with other infrastructure needs and updating things with traditional review of all available alternatives. And our plan actually looked at all of these different alternatives where they could work best. Source control is identified as the best for some of our smaller sewer sheds instead of adding additional storage, just because there's so much stormwater getting into the system. But we looked at a number of these. We have over-under sewers. We've talked about eliminating manholes, and we do that anywhere that we redo roads and redo water lines at the same time. We have to do all of our infrastructure at once. So if you look at our plan, which is available on the website, you'll see analysis of all these different control technologies. Next, please. One of the keys to the success of actually finishing the plan and then its implementation has been some very extensive public participation for many, many years. But it was the key in getting started. This is a picture of this was a snowy 20-degree January night, and we got about 150 people in the high school cafeteria to come out and talk about sewers and what to do with the sewers and how to prioritize them. That's been a very important key to success in both prioritizing the plan as well as getting public buy-in. Next, please. One of the things that worked really well for Lakewood, we did a variety of public education and outreach. The group you see pictured there is touring the Lakewood wastewater treatment plant. This was a group we called Clean Water Lakewood Team. It had 25 people who committed to 2 years of monthly meetings to look at the issues in Lakewood and to advise on the integrated plan before we went out to even broader public comment. We were very fortunate to have a number of water professionals, but we had just a lot of concerned citizens who were very interested and took very active roles in this whole process. We used all the tools that were on the left there, that all of which work together. Lakewood maintained a specific website for Clean Water Lakewood and has used social media effectively. Next, please. This is when we got to the public meetings, this is where we asked prioritization. Where, if we're going to spend our dollars, where are we going to spend them and in what sequence? And what are we going to, then what else can we do with those projects? So this is just one of the things that we showed to the public and got their feedback on that. Next, please. What we heard and what we understood in the whole process is that Lakewood needed flexibility because of its unique circumstances. It's a very strange sewer system, entirely built up, not a lot of money, and also it needed the ability to be very sensitive to affordability pressures. So the planning both helped that and enabled us to be nimble if other opportunities came along. We certainly look forward to capitalizing on any emerging technologies. So we've figured out what are the most important things to do first, and then be ready to look at again at the choices we've made and how we're going to implement controls for our sewer system. We also wanted to be very flexible if there's any land use changes, which happen every half a century in parts of Lakewood, that we took advantage of them. As we said, the italicized phrase became our watchword. If we put a shovel in the ground, we have to hit bullseyes because we don't have extra money, extra time, or extra land to do extra projects. Next, please. This is our plan. It's on the website. It was required under our NPDES permit to complete the plan, and we did on time on March 1st, 2019. So what this does is it did a full affordability analysis. It did a full alternatives analysis. It married the two together. We came up with a schedule, one that we believe is affordable. It gave us the ability to adaptively manage. And what I want to mention is, and you'll see it, that when I say CSO 058, that's the same one at Lakewood Park that I pointed out before. I'll show you in a moment how that was a benefit of having planned this all out. We cost effectively got that project done. Just so you know, when you look at this, it's 100 pages of a report plus 3 volumes of appendices. I have other clients who have integrated plans that are as limited as 20 pages in total. It does not have to be, the exercise that Lakewood did, because that included Lakewood's very detailed modeling reports and all of our public participation. It's there for you to do it, but you should not be daunted that you have to do something on the scale that Lakewood did to have an effective, useful, integrated plan. Next, please. This is an example of integrated planning in action. I mentioned the overflow that was at the top of the list would have not been our biggest priority given the overflow volume or the pollutant load that it had contributed. But we had an opportunity. We wanted to resurface Lake Avenue, a major east-west thoroughfare. And in doing so, this was sort of, let's be fully integrated. We built new storm infrastructure that was going to be later in our plan at the same time that we replaced 100-year-old water lines, took out lead service lines that were connected to them, and rebuilt the road for the next 50 years plus. In doing so, because we had the plan, we were able to offload stormwater with these new stormwater infrastructure and take this particular combined sewer overflow that activated 40 to 80 times a year, depending on the weather, and take it down to 2 events per year where it's compliant within the CSO control policy. That was not the top of our list, but we may have missed that opportunity if we had not done a fully integrated plan of what we were going to do when we got the opportunities. This is the, you know, at a place like Lakewood, we have to get everything we can in each circumstance. We have to hit bullseye. The other part of this is the dollars that are mentioned there. This positioned Lakewood, because we were doing everything once, Lakewood scored very high in state funding dollars, because this was also not just a road project, but was also taking care of lead lines and overflows. This was, you know, a couple of years ago. So that was a significant component of the funding. It leveraged non-local dollars. Next, please. So this is that point. Having the integrated plan, first of all, the most important thing is it gave us confidence that we could have consistent level rate increases, slightly above the inflation, in order to sustain the improvements that we know we have to make, and the extensive capital improvements, and make those investments in infrastructure. At the same time, being not having rate spikes. It's very important for our landlords and for our rental community to not have spikes, because we certainly want our landlords to have a predictive amount of how much things are going to go up, so that they don't fear reinvesting in the property that they own. And we've had some success with that. If we do have spikes, we fear that, you know, renters are the easiest to leave, and we'll have an issue in Lakewood. Instead, the reverse has happened. We have a very strong rental market. And as the mayor said, we have lots of a young population here that likes the variety of housing, the walkability here. We've been able to integrate the projects, which has leveraged the non-local dollars, like I mentioned. And having a plan also emphasized our commitment to infrastructure prioritization, where we would spend money. This was really important when the ARPA dollars came to Lakewood. The first tranche we got a year ago, and Mayor George immediately prioritized more than half of those dollars for our sewer programs and our infrastructure under our integrated plan. So that commitment was vetted with the public, endorsed by the public, and has seen great fruit for us. Next, please. All of our outreach also included asking people about how, you know, they want to pay for this, and there was strong support for adding an impervious surface fee, which we did. We added a wet weather fee. Just this last year, the mayor led that through city council. It was a lot of public outreach. There was not a lot of opposition for it. People understand the need. They understood that these things need to be paid for, that this was an equitable way to pay for the wet weather costs we were facing. And so we were able to institute that impervious fee. Next, please. One of the things we've done along with the integrated planning process was turn to those things in our municipal codes that would foster green infrastructure and other improvements in our stormwater. So anywhere there's redevelopment, Lakewood has a very robust green infrastructure requirements and stormwater requirements. So what you see at the top is a McDonald's in the top left. In order to get their drive-through, because they're right up against a residential neighborhood, they needed a variance. That variance specifies they had to put in and maintain the green infrastructure BMPs that you see there. We put them in a number of parking places. We were able to secure some US EPA grants for stormwater and some state of Ohio grants to put impervious pavers on municipal parking lots. So this is basically what we do when we do anything. It's all part of what we do going forward, and the integrated plan helped focus all of the aspects of our municipal work on that. In fact, in the process, what we found is, and I find this with other clients, we were already doing 80 to 90% probably internally of what we wanted to do. Putting it all in an integrated plan made it easier for people to check in and continue that last 10% and realize some of the very great benefits that we've been seeing. Next, please. So in fact, integrated planning and Lakewood's commitment to its water resource have really changed our relationship with water, frankly, where we've embraced Lakewood Park not as a landfill, but as, you know, it's a destination regionally. We have the Rocky River on our western border. You can now rent kayaks, canoes, and jet skis and take them up and down the river or out into the lake. It's really a place that instead of having an industrial use of Lake Erie, is embraced as for its aesthetics and for recreation and the things, frankly, that our younger population wants to see. Next, please. Mayor?
Well, I just want to conclude by saying thank you for joining us today and listening to Lakewood's story on integrated planning. I'd like to invite anyone, if you'd like, to come up to Lakewood for a visit, enjoy Lake Erie, the Rocky River, our parks, our great restaurants. And if there's any questions following the presentation, please feel free to reach out to Lou or myself. Our contact information is on the screen there. And thank you again.
Okay, so let's get started. I will be facilitating our breakout session, and Delia will be sharing slides and putting the polls up. So we're going to be using our phones, or if you have, or if you're able to toggle either the internet or texting on your phones for some of the poll questions. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that is going to be a part of this facilitated discussion. Oh, cool. Everybody is, yeah, I guess maybe putting who you are in the chat is the best way to do it. Okay, perfect. All right, so we can go to the next slide. Okay, let me just pull up my notes. So we're going to first talk about how to get started, and I'm hoping that you will also be interested in sharing any stories about whether you've gotten started or not. Now, we do have a fact sheet already that's available for how to get started, and so we'll put that in. Delia just put it into the chat, so if you wanted to kind of follow along with the fact sheet, you can do that, or with the PowerPoint presentation, either way. So the next slide is a poll question. And so we're going to test our savviness as it relates to doing this, this technology related poll question. So you can break out your phone, or you can go on to the internet with Chrome or Internet Explorer, wherever, and you can take this poll, which will answer the question, what is your level of familiarity with integrated planning right now? That will help us kind of understand where everybody is at in the breakout room. So if you are on your phone, then you will go to your messages and send a text to Delia W636. And in that text message, you will write 22333. Oh, I think I just said that backwards. Okay, I just said that backwards. So you're going to, you're going to actually, the contact person is, okay, you guys are already figuring it out. I'm just not explaining it well. So you're going to actually put the contact is 22333, and then you text Delia W636 in that text, or you can easily just go to the poll ev.com/Delia W636. So if you have questions, you can unmute yourself, and there are instructions in the chat, because I apologize, I just totally explained that wrong in the first place, but I think everyone probably understands that you're texting to the number 22333, and you're going to put in your text the message Delia W636, or go online. So I don't know if, Delia, are you able to tell how many people have responded?
Let me check.
Because it looks like we have 50%, so half of you are relatively unfamiliar and haven't reviewed any resources. I'm just curious how many people have actually texted or gone online. I think we have a raise hand function, actually. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
I can't see the exact number, but let me keep looking.
Raise your, okay, so let's use our tools in the Zoom raise your hand or give us a thumbs up if you have already filled out the poll question.
Oh, we have 10 responses.
Okay. So yeah, so Kelly or Lisa, Denise, Dennis, Alden, if you guys have questions about how to get to the poll, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Okay, well, we'll move on to the next one. This was our first trial. Okay, here we go. We have a little bit more people. Good. All right, so okay, yeah, I know some of you guys will not be actually responding because you're not a municipality, so that's completely fine. I was just sometimes we'll see how each question rolls out, and sometimes you can respond even if you're not a municipality, just so we can see who the audience is. Okay, so getting started. The first thing is it's really important to plan ahead, and just based on what Lou just talked about, planning ahead was able to land them some really great buy-in from the public and have a process that was very cost effective for them, because it can be complex and it can be a long-term process. Typically it takes about 18 to 36 months to get your plan in place and finalize it, put it in and have it ready for any future permitting or consent decree. So the next thing is getting informed. And so number one, thank you for coming today, because today this is a great way for you to start getting informed. And I would recommend that after we talk today, one of the great things that you can look at are the actual profiles of other municipalities who have developed an integrated plan. Those are on our website. You could look at example plans, and we also have those on our website as well. You could look at our policy, our 2012 integrated planning policy document, if you wanted to understand what that framework looked like. We have a number of different webcasts, so you can listen to webcasts to hear about the stories, just like you heard today from Mayor George and Lou McMahon on how integrated planning has worked for those communities or the states. So that's a great way to start getting informed about what it is, how it's helped others, what the benefits are. Then you want to define your planning scope and determine what other entities should be involved, and then building your team. So if you have, a piece of paper or you're jotting down notes, start thinking about in your mind, who could be on your planning team? Who are the people at the public works staff? Maybe you have a wastewater treatment facility engineers, your director. Maybe you do all of those things, and you need to reach out to public relations or city planners or maintenance staff to really think about who could be on your planning team, to look at providing data, supporting the team, being a liaison to the state permitting authority, or researching funding. So those are some of the roles that this planning team. And you might need to hire a consultant or someone that has done this before to help you get through the process. Next slide. Getting external buy-in is going to be extremely important. Identifying your priorities. Why are you even thinking about integrated planning? What's your why for the integrated planning, as well as a preliminary schedule and budget. So those are all the steps that you want to kind of get through to get started in your integrated planning journey. And so you can download that fact sheet and use that as a guide. Next slide. So determining requirements and drivers. This is the element 1 in the integrated planning framework. And the fact sheet right now is almost ready to go for public consumption. It is that, the one that you just put in, Delia, is the funding one, but that's okay. That's going to be the next one. So next slide. So let's find out which permitting
permitted sources of discharges you currently manage, and you can select all that apply. So you can use your phone and you can text the 2233 and then text Delia W636, or you can go online to pollev.com/Delia W636. So go ahead if you're a municipality or you represent a municipality, so that we know which permitted sources of discharge do you manage. Okay, so a number of you manage the wastewater treatment facilities. And one question I would have for you is, if you are managing a wastewater treatment facility, have you reached out to your other counterparts within your municipality to talk about maybe stormwater or the combined sewer system that might be going to your wastewater treatment facility? Has anyone done that? Reached out to other representatives within your municipality of other discharge sources? Okay, I don't have anyone speaking up. So we'll go to the next slide. This is so determining our requirements. Once you get started, yeah, thanks, Evan. Yeah, if you want to post your answers in the chat, if you don't want to unmute yourself, then that would be great. So that then I'll keep the chat open. Here. Oops. Sorry, I'm just finding the chat. Okay, here we go. So the first thing for an integrated plan is that you're going to need to identify what those Clean Water Act requirements are. And hopefully you are aware of the permit effluent limits you have. Maybe you have waste load allocations from your total maximum daily loads. There might be compliance orders or consent decrees. Maybe you have some combined sewer overflow reduction requirements or retention standards. So those are the things that you want to think about. If you could post in the chat, what are some of the requirements that you would possibly include in your integrated plan? No commitments, just wanted to get people thinking about which ones that you think would be the most relevant for your integrated plan. If you could post that in the chat. Okay, so let's go to the next slide after you think about your requirements and maybe some non-clean water requirements. Okay, great. So Leanne talked about MS4 and floodplain and wastewater treatment facility. Great. What about maybe some community priorities that are not discharges? Let's hear from the group. What are some ideas that you might have that the community would be wanting to do versus what's required? So some examples of that would be protecting your source waters, maintaining your water supply. Maybe you're protecting your high-risk assets. Maybe there's some financial public health implications. Maybe you want to incorporate green infrastructure. So I know we have two things going here. One is put in the chat things that you think you would want to put in your integrated plan that might not be a discharge. And we also have a poll going here that is talking about, do you have existing plans or data that you could incorporate in your integrated planning effort? So it looks like many have no existing plan, but have data. Some have an existing plan to start from. So it's interesting. So no plans whatsoever, but you have the data. So an integrated plan might be a really good way to pull that data into something that you could use. Great. It looks like Catherine McKillips is looking at CSO reduction and possibly looking at green infrastructure where possible. We're actually going to be coming out with a resource that shows how you can locate your green infrastructure so that you can improve the peak flows, shave off the peak of the peak flows during wet weather events directly into your combined sewer overflow. So that might be a resource, Catherine, that you'd be interested in looking at. Great, next slide. And what are your integrated planning priorities? Okay, so there are a lot of different priorities here. Maybe you have some new permit requirements or pending permit requirements. There are examples of, I know, Columbia, Missouri. They knew that a permit requirement is going to happen on their wastewater treatment facility. And so they wanted to get ahead of that and start looking at integrated planning. Maybe there's some non-compliance that is necessary for you to think about. And we don't actually know who is putting in the answers for each of these, so it's basically anonymous. Maybe there's some asset vulnerability. In Springfield, Massachusetts, they recognized that doing every single CSO project was not going to help them when their 100-year-old pumping station, if it went out, there would be a massive flow of stormwater going into the river, and they had no redundancy for that. So they definitely wanted to address some asset vulnerability when it came to their pumping stations, and because they were so old, they were very worried that it could just go out at any time. So they wanted to prioritize that instead of doing that last little bit of CSO work. And that totally made sense because it was prioritizing human health and clean water. Great, okay, so we have new pending permit requirements and minimizing ratepayer burden as the top two, with addressing non-compliance as the next highest. Let's go to the next slide. So determining requirements, identifying vulnerable communities and other community drivers. I'm really curious to know, with a raise of hands, how many of you have low income or overburdened parts of your community that you want to be able to incorporate into a possible integrated plan. If you could raise your hand or put your thumb up, because I'm not sure if everybody has the hand raised part. And we have some tools called EJ Screen that can help identify communities that have those concerns. But you might already know because you live there and you don't need a tool to tell you that, but we do have that if that's something. There's also sensitive areas. So let's see, we had one person put their hand up. Okay. Great, in Nebraska. So that's great that you'll be considering that. Anyone else considering sensitive environmental areas? Does any of you have environmental sensitive areas that you would want to put up, look and incorporate into your integrated plan? You can raise your hand. Okay. And then also there might be some public spaces or communities, community valued spaces, there are recreation areas that you're really interested in protecting and maybe putting in some stormwater management there as well. Next slide. And then Evan, how much time do we have left? I think. Okay, another poll question. And you know, the point of these poll questions is to just start getting your brain thinking about what exactly you need to do to start the integrated planning process. So what is really driving you? You know, that is going to be obviously the utmost importance, because if you're passionate about it and you know this is going to be helpful, then you can be the champion and go for it for integrated planning. So go into your poll here and ask yourself, you know, what are some of the other drivers that you're hoping to address? You know, not just Clean Water Act, but maybe you want to protect your drinking water or maintain your water supply through water reuse. Maybe you're really worried about future impacts of climate change. and or maybe you want to better serve your vulnerable communities in a better way. So let's go to your polls and see what you have to say. And if there is anyone that would like to share, you can feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat. Why something is really important to you? Okay, this is looking good. So better serving vulnerable communities and protecting sensitive environmental areas are the top right now. And integrated planning is a perfect way to do that, because one of the processes within the integrated planning framework is stakeholder engagement. And this stakeholder engagement is going to be the key, as Lou McMahon said, to success when it comes to getting buy-in down the road. And you can address, Portland, Oregon has a really good example of, not Oregon, Portland, Maine, talks about how they looked to find out where their vulnerable communities were, and they went into those areas. They're a larger city than Lakewood is, so there was a lot more land to cover, and they did a concerted effort to really pinpoint exactly where those vulnerable communities are and bring in those specific people into the conversation, which is great. Okay, so that is wonderful. So really think about who are the community groups. If you are, start jotting this down. Who could be your community groups? Maybe put in the chat. Who are the community groups that you could talk to? What are their names? Let's see if anybody wants to share the names of your community groups that could help with getting in touch with your vulnerable communities and talking about the importance of being a part of this integrated planning process that you're thinking about. Okay, next slide. So here are the main points of the determining your requirements. So I'm wondering, are there, when do you want to begin the stakeholder engagement process? Is there anything that you've been thinking about in terms of who you would reach out to first? So if you've thought about this at all, go ahead and blow up the chat and put in a type of person that you think would be the next. What's your next best step? Who do you want to reach out to? It doesn't have to be a person's name. It could be their position, or it could be the organization. Why don't you put something in here now? Is who do you think would be the best type of person for you to reach out to really talk about this idea of doing some integrated planning work, to help you think about what are all the requirements that your municipality is facing, or how you could be maybe defining the scope of this possible integrated plan. So go ahead and do that now while I sit quiet for a second. Okay, the mayor, excellent, yes. Talk to the mayor, perfect. City manager, okay, so bring in the city manager, excellent idea. Who else has some good ideas? Master gardeners, local college, the Sierra Club, and the city council, excellent. Those are excellent ideas. Yeah, get them rolling and thinking about these ideas. I'm sure they'd be thrilled to be a part of the process. The town council, public works, and the mayor. Yes, excellent. Okay. Great. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now, funding is a really big part of the integrated planning process because a lot of times getting the funding to do anything related to water infrastructure can be very difficult, but times are changing, especially with the bipartisan infrastructure law. And many of the municipalities have actually used their fees, their water utility fees, to fund their integrated plan. So, for example, Rolla, Missouri, they used $100,000 in general funds to develop its integrated plan. That ended up, the implementation of that plan ended up will eventually cost $94 million. So that's about 0.01% of the plan's total implementation cost was towards the funding of the plan itself. So that's just one example. Let me get back to my screen. So this fact sheet is available, and Delia just put that in the chat. So you can click on that link and then you'll have that fact sheet to view now or later. Next slide. And I think when you do talk to the mayor or the city manager about this idea of investing in your water infrastructure for the long term, it has the possibility to have cost savings. So when you're looking across, and the other benefit is that it can help with rate shock. So if you think about your plan that goes out to 15, 20, 25 years into the future, you can then incrementally fund your investments over time, and you can show the state permitting authority or other people who you need to, the public, your mayor, etc. We have a plan over the next 15 to 20 years, and this is how we're going to get to cleaner water. This is how we're going to protect our public with cleaner water, more recreation opportunities, less risk for sewage overflows, that kind of thing. So and it looked like many of you had data available, but may have not had existing plans. And so the cost of your integrated planning process is really going to vary. If you have a lot of data already, then great. You've just saved money on doing a conditions assessment of your system. Maybe you have that information. If you already have plans available, like capital improvement plans, or you have asset management plans, or you have master long-term control plans, if you have all those things already, then you've already shrunk your budget to what you would have to do anyway. If you can get somebody on staff to dedicate a percentage of time to the integrated planning, you've then cut down on the funding as well, so you don't have to hire a consultant. And then if you want to, I know some municipalities who are MS4s, actually, if you could raise your hand if you manage an MS4. Let's see who raises their hand here. And the reason why I'm asking if anyone is managing an MS4, okay, we got some thumbs up here, is that in some situations, I've seen multiple MS4s in small townships get band together and develop a long-term stormwater plan so that you can really think about how your systems could move forward collectively, especially if you are in the same basin. And then the extent of your stakeholder engagement. I know Richmond, Virginia, they had a long stakeholder engagement, and they hired a third-party facilitator, and so that costs a little bit more than someone else that did their own stakeholder engagement. So that's another part of the cost of your integrated plan. Next. And when you think about it, if typically what we've seen over the 20-some plans that we've looked at it's typically costs less than 1% of the entire implementation of the plan. So it is a small percentage when you think about implementing and investing in your infrastructure. And 18 to 36 months. So when you're budgeting your timing, make sure that you give yourself enough time to be able to get the plan in place. So if you have a permit coming up in the next 3 to 4 years, this is a perfect time to start thinking about integrated planning. Okay, next slide. And then here are some funding opportunities. So I'm going to be quiet for a second, and in the chat, I want you to put in any funding opportunities that you've already gotten for other infrastructure projects or that you plan to apply for, so that you could do some type of infrastructure project, whether it's planning or construction, anything like that. So I'm going to be quiet while you put in the different ways that you plan to start looking for funding. Which one of the ones do you want to maybe look into? For example, is anyone thinking about applying to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund to get funding to do an integrated plan? That is a possibility. Okay, it looks like Tara is thinking about that. There might be some state grants. Are there any state grants? ARPA funding is another possible funding source that funds water infrastructure, and that needs to be prioritized through your municipality. Okay, and then let's go to the next slide. All right, well, here we go. Now you get to answer it in a poll question. What do you think is feasible is what we want to know. Do you think creating a stormwater or sewer utility fee? Maybe you're going to use your general fund through tax revenue. Or you're going to look for a loan or a grant, and that could be just general. Oh, okay, so maybe the brick funding through NEMA, FEMA. Okay, I think that's probably what the other is. What else? Okay, so stormwater utility fee looks like that might be feasible for some of you. Many of you are going to look into planning and loan grants. Okay, and no one has said that they're going to use their general fund. Okay, last call for this poll question. Grants, we hope. Yes, we hope too. I think, the overflow sewer grant, that is an allocation to all of the states. Integrated planning is an eligible project for that, and that is a grant. So you don't have to pay that back, obviously. So if that is definitely something I would highly recommend that you apply for if you wanted to get some type of grant money from the EPA's overflow sewer grant that's administered through your state. Okay, next. We have only 1 or 2 more minutes. And then funding your integrated plan. So just thinking really far into the future, once you get your integrated plan, there is funding available. And if you go to the next slide, once you know what all of your budget looks like, what your full infrastructure costs are, this is where you do, you've got all that information because you've done the plan. And if you want to look at costs in the report to Congress, we have an appendix that shows what all of the costs are for each of the plan that we put in there as a profile. Okay, next. And here are some links to loans and grants that could fund the implementation of the integrated plan. Some of them are very similar to the funding the development of the plan, and there might be some others. For example, Seattle has gotten 2 WIFIA loans to fund the projects within their integrated plan, over $288 million. Is it million or billion? I think it's million. But so they've gotten a WIFIA loan for that, and having that integrated plan set them up. Lou McMahon talked about Lakewood, set them up for ARPA funding, and they were able to prioritize their water infrastructure because they had that plan. So this is really going to set you up for when new money comes in. Next slide. And then there are some that are tailored to underserved or low-income communities. And so these are some grant opportunities that you could look into for those vulnerable communities, that at-risk communities that are in your area. Next slide. And lastly, what funding sources would you consider for the implementation? So get those juices flowing in your brain. For implementation, what are those sources that you think that you would look at? Would they be the same? Would they be different? Okay, so for implementation, general fund was selected. Excellent. Anyone else? Now that we all have the polling down, and okay. So again, looking at planning grants and clean water SRF, but general funds in there. So, okay, great. And the next slide. Okay, so any thoughts? We're going to be moving over to the back to the main room. So thanks for listening. And if you have any other thoughts or you wanted to talk about, or you had questions, we have Evan and Ellen who are available for technical assistance after this workshop, that you can really dive in and think about how integrated planning could work for you.
So let's start with group 1 with Ellen. Is there anything that we wanted to share potentially from your group about the first topic we covered, about getting started and recognizing our drivers?
I had a comment about the funding piece, but I think recognizing the drivers, I think across multiple community priorities was something that stood out for our group, and particularly around vulnerable communities. That's a new, I would say sort of a new area of focus that a lot of folks would like to use this process to be able to address the challenges facing vulnerable communities.
Okay. Did you want to go ahead and say your funding comment?
Sure. I mean, I think what I took away from that little bit of conversation is the more we can provide in terms of specifics about funding resources that could support planning, the better. The communities need that information.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've recognized in internal conversations here for a little while. There's some state-specific funding sources for planning. At least I know of some in North Carolina, but it's very difficult at a national level to get all that together. But that's something that we can continue to work on. How about group 2? What was your highlight of the debrief on the recognizing the drivers?
Yes, I'm group 2.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we had a number of people in our group that have wastewater treatment facilities. So I think that is going to be that was one of the high priorities there. We also had a few people who thought wanted to use green infrastructure and use that to help with reducing their combined sewer overflows. So that was definitely a priority and a driver for them. Vulnerable communities also came up as one of the high, priority reasons outside of meeting Clean Water Act requirements that people wanted to use the integrated planning process to address that. So we saw that trend as well. The other thing I wanted to mention is, in terms of getting started, I asked the group, who would you talk to next? What is your next small step? And many people talked about they would want to talk to their city council, they want to talk to their mayor, maybe I think those were the main people. Some people talked about community groups, that they would want to talk to, like the Sierra Club or Master Gardeners, and start having the conversation about, hey, what do you think about integrated planning? Because I think just getting buy-in and getting people understand what it is and how it could help them is probably a really good next step. So that was another thing that people talked about with how they wanted to get started.
That's an excellent point because it gives folks an action item and gives them a direction. How about funding in your group, Robin, and group 2?
Yeah, you know, what was interesting about funding is when I asked the group about what they would use to fund their development of an integrated plan, most of them chose the Clean Water State Revolving Fund as their option. No one chose using the general fund, any tax revenues. But then when we went into funding the implementation of the plan, the actual construction of it, the general fund did come up, and Clean Water State Revolving Fund also came up. And, you know, a couple people put in the chat, grants, I hope. And I mentioned that the overflow sewer grant program that states are administering does fund integrated planning, which I'm not sure if everyone realizes that, but that is a great opportunity because it is a grant, and integrated planning is squarely eligible for that. So that was just one trend that I noticed.
Yeah, that's great. What I was going to bring up when you were talking earlier was the new emphasis that the federal government has, certainly the executive branch has currently, about environmental justice, and you mentioned vulnerable communities, and I think that perhaps in the future we might see a little bit more support for that vulnerable community, perhaps in the form of direct assistance or hopefully in funding, and how integrated planning can help can address some of these environmental justice issues. And we're going to be publishing here pretty shortly a document that tells about how certain communities have used integrated planning to address environmental justice concerns in their communities. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be on the EFC website. So we've got 4 case studies there about how they addressed environmental justice with integrated planning. Group 3, Heather, what was your highlight for getting started, for drivers, perhaps for buy-in?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we had talked about was that we wanted to make sure that everyone had a good grasp on their Clean Water Act requirements. We got more questions on the financial components of it, and actually I think that was one of the more interesting things is, you know, we had some larger communities and some smaller communities, and one of the smaller communities had mentioned, oh, well, you know, we don't have the resources that some of the bigger communities have, and they were like, actually, no, we don't. we're in the exact same boat as you. You know, we've had a lot of issues lately, and we've had a lot of tax hikes and cost of living increases, and you know, they just don't have the same resources that they thought they would going into this integrated planning process.
Okay. And was there any highlights for funding that perhaps was distinct from the other 2 groups, just so for the sake of time?
To be efficient with it. No, I think the issues that Robin just discussed, I think were in line with what we had in our groups as well. So to be efficient with it.
So with that, I'm going to use the last 4 minutes of this workshop to kind of go over a tool that the EFC at UNC has been working on with feedback from EPA and feedback from the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center. We call it our Integrated Planning Roadmap tool. The tool is not yet available for everyone to fill out. We are using it for direct assistance, one-on-one help right now, but it's not yet available for anyone to fill out just because we're continuing to scope the resources component of the tool. But I just want to go over the tool, what the purpose of it is, and then what you can expect to see as a community that's looking to get started with integrated planning. So the purpose is to provide targeted recommendations of existing resources to communities and really identify what's the next step for the community. So Robin brought up you know, who are you going to talk to next? And that's actually one of the things that we bring up is getting buy-in from your management and your council. Who are you going to talk to next? What are you going to do next? Where are you going to go next for funding? That's what we're hoping this tool will help you answer. So I just want to go over a couple examples of the questions and then give you an example of some of the resources that you might see. So we just get some background information on you, and then we ask you what your Clean Water Act obligations are. And this is going to help us target resources about Clean Water Act obligations to your community, and really just help you see holistically what is your community dealing with, and how are they interconnected. Then we're going to ask, are you currently in compliance with your Clean Water Act obligations? And this is not going to be a trick question, or we're not going to go after you if you say no. This is really just meant to say that if you are in compliance with Clean Water Act obligations and you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing, integrated planning still is an excellent way to stay in compliance with those requirements. Then we ask you to let us know if you've included any infrastructure in current plans, such as asset management plans, or long-term control plans, et cetera, and how those plans can integrate into your integrated plan. And we're going to get you thinking about, if you have those plans, making sure you're not neglecting those plans. When you're starting your integrated planning process, you're really building off those plans into your integrated plan. Then we ask you about your buy-in from your governing body and your management, and want to make sure that you have that support. And if you don't have that support, we've got a couple of resources potentially that might help you build that support. And also we ask you to reach out to us for direct assistance in helping you build that support if you need it. Then we're going to ask you if you have funding for the integrated plan, and then we're going to point you to the resources, a lot of which we've discussed today. And then, you know, if you want to talk to us one-on-one, we can maybe help you in a more direct way, a more intimate way about trying to find funding that's right for your community. Some of your breakout groups discuss stakeholder groups directly. I hope that everyone did, but potentially not. If you have existing stakeholder groups, we want you to think about how those might be able to be used in the integrated planning process, adapted to the integrated planning process to become the stakeholder group to inform your plan and inform the implementation of your plan throughout the process. So a stakeholder engagement process is not just a checkbox. It's something that's ongoing throughout your entire integrated planning process. And then we ask you if you're in contact with the state or your permitting authority about the plan or about the potential plan. And if not, it's definitely okay. And that's something that we can help you with. We can potentially talk to the state and see how they might handle it and relay that information to you, or maybe get everybody in the same room. And that's something we can do with our direct assistance. And then we ask you, would you like direct assistance, and ask for any questions or feedback. And all of these have logic built into them. It's a survey tool called Qualtrics, and it's going to spit out a report to you that's specific to your community. And then that's going to have all the resources, and you'll be able to download that report as a PDF and have those links to click on and follow later on. So this tool we're going to be targeting by sending out. Once we're complete with it, we're going to send it out to anyone who's registered for any of one of our webinars and has indicated that they're considering integrated planning. We're not going to send it to folks who have indicated they're in the process of a plan, or they're in the process of implementing a plan. So any of you who indicated that you're considering integrated planning, you can look for this tool in a future email. Again, contact us for direct assistance. And certainly, we're really willing to talk to both municipalities and state permitting authorities. So it's not just limited. I know there was some folks from MDE on the call, and I think some folks from Oregon DEP. So please contact us directly if you want any technical assistance, and we can really sit down and discuss your situation and how we can help. So with that, that's all I have for today. Please feel free to send me questions directly. Send me any comments you have. Let us know what webinar you want next. What's your sticking point? Just anything that you think that we can do to help you, or any questions that we can answer. So thank you so much to everybody that participated and was active in the discussion. And thank you again to our speakers, Lou and Mayor George. And thank you to our facilitators and our note takers and our poll workers, if you will. But with that, I hope everybody enjoys their afternoon. We have recorded this webinar, and we will be posting that on our website in the next week or two.